We're here today with Liz Wilke. Liz, welcome to the show.
Hi, Drew. Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. Hey, can you just start off by taking a minute to introduce yourself and tell us how you ended up as principal economist at Gusto?
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. So I have always sort of been fascinated with work and how we work and why we work. Work is the one thing everybody sells. And there's a market, right, for work with employers and people looking for work. And that market is really interesting, like how we find work, what employers need. It's heavily influenced by technology. And I've just always been so fascinated by, that whole dynamic and how we design work to have dignity and excitement and to bring out the best in people and to really make work, work for people, right? So I was at LinkedIn doing tech policy and future of work issues, and I got the opportunity to come to Gusto, which is an HR benefits and payroll firm that serves over 200,000 small and medium businesses. Because the data was just so good, right? We know a lot about, how people find jobs, but we don't, see sort of real time what they get paid, whether or not they get health insurance, all those things about job quality that we really care about. And I've been doing that for 2 years and no intentions of stopping. The questions are too interesting. We're digging into remote work and contractors and freelancers and international and distributed work. And, there's just in this time, no shortage of interesting and important questions to ask about how, when, and why people work.
That's awesome, and can't wait to go deeper with you. And I love that you said, to have dignity and excitement. And I love the statement, make work for people. So the last few years, wow. There's been so much change, market volatility. What to you are some of the most fascinating labor trends that, based off of what we've seen as we look ahead the next 2 to 3 years, what do you think are some of the most important labor trends we should look out for?
I think some of the most important ones are the rise of contracting and freelance work. People were freelancing before the pandemic and before the last 2 years, but that's sort of like saying that people were doing remote and telework before the pandemic. And so what's different about this now? And the answer is that scale matters. And so the number of people that are doing freelance or contracted work has increased exponentially. In Gusto's own data, the number of contractors per employee has doubled since we started measuring it before the pandemic. And what that sort of means is that employees or workers are looking for freelancing part-time or full-time as a way to hedge their bets about their current employment or to jump into a future job that they want to build skills for. And we can talk about skilling in a second. I don't want to get too deep down into it. Yeah. And I think what that's really telling us is, one, businesses are looking for a sort of more agile, more on demand, more sort of really skill relevant workforce, and that workers are sort of realizing that opportunity and that there is value for them in the flexibility, in the ability to take on projects that they care about. And I think that's a really important development because it speaks to this bigger issue that we are really focusing again on why we work and what on earth we spend all this time doing. So I've said since the pandemic, never underestimate the ability of a crisis moment to make you question, lots of other things. And I think that we're still working through that collectively. So the technology has changed, but we've changed as people. And I think freelancing and contracting work is one of those big ones. And I think remote and hybrid work is the most exciting thing to happen in the workspace since unionization. It's changing everything about how we've thought about looking for talent, how we think about what's important about building culture, how we create personal connection and engagement and excitement at work. And I think those two things together and sort of all the implications that come with them are probably the most interesting and exciting things about work in the last 2 years.
Yeah, thanks. And, talking a lot with folks like yourself about the future of work, my point of view is that anything like we're talking here on Zoom, there's so much that people are relating as like going hybrid, going remote. That is not the future. That is today, right? And so I think there's an imperative for people to adopt this, get on board, right? Because there is no, it's not like, oh, I can eventually do that. Like we have to get on board now. That said, looking further out, and one of the things we focus on a lot on this show is the impact that technologies like AI, automation, robotics, Web3 are going to have on this future. And right now we're at this moment, we're in the news. You see ChatGPT, generative AI is like every other word in media. And, you know, as they say, if it bleeds, it leads. And there's so much fear-based media coverage about AI replacing human workers. There's a recent study by the World Economic Forum that showed that they estimate about 80 million jobs will be displaced by AI. On the flip side of that, and we see this every tech evolution, whether it's computers, the internet, or AI today, they also say it can, they suggest it'll create over 90 million jobs. I think it'll probably be over 100 million jobs. What's your take on the displacement of workers?
I think regarding the displacement of workers, you can look at it a couple of ways. You can think that it's going to be doom and gloom for everybody that was doing a job and now does not have that job available. Or you can think that AI and technological tools are going to free workers to do more and interesting and better work. I think the truth is somewhere in between. I think it's not very charitable towards people to think that they are doing the best and only job they can ever do. And if we take that job away from them, that they will be much worse off. I think it's also a little too optimistic to think that every worker is going to be sort of set free to, pursue some lifelong dream or to do significantly better work. And I think we just need to sort of hold both of those like opposing views in our hand. What I do think is that AI, like real AI, like ChatGPT level AI that can do things that humans sort of like couldn't do, or sort of only humans could do, is going to change a lot. We've been sort of in the bottom of this J curve. So if you know the concept, right, we had all these computer tools, but we didn't see productivity going up for humans, right, by and large. And the idea was that, well, maybe the technology is not that transformational. Maybe humans don't really know how to use it that well. And I think the recent releases that we've been seeing with AI and ChatGPT, I think have brought the possibility forward that we are going to get on another really fast upward trajectory, that we're sort of get through the bottom of that J curve and really sort of take off. I think ChatGPT is a great example because it is going to generate so much more content, Drew. Like ChatGPT has made people like me sound like journalists, and how much it's going to disrupt sort of depends a little bit on how much content we actually want to consume, whether or not humans really enjoy novel content versus sort of bread and butter content, and how sort of we consume those in different amounts. Mm-hmm. And it's also going to, so if all ChatGPT does is get me to write more effective emails, that's not revolutionary. If what ChatGPT does is make journalists really sort of niche,
yeah.
Sorry, let me back that up, because I don't mean journalists, and I definitely don't want to suggest that they're not professionalized. If what ChatGPT does is sort of eliminate the need for specialized content writers, or allows content writers to do the work of 10, right, when they previously could do the work of 1, that is going to meaningfully change that labor market. I think ChatGPT is a great example also because it really tells us how we as humans are going to have to change. And we are going to have to really lean into our capabilities of asking better questions, right? So if you've been paying attention in ChatGPT, it's all about giving a good prompt, right? You can't just give anything to ChatGPT and expect it to come with something that's relevant and useful and accurate. You have to really set it up. And there's an art and probably a little bit of science to that. And I think we have to get better to ask better questions, to really get investigative, to think critically, because not everything ChatGPT gives you is correct. And I think that our competencies as humans are in really asking the right questions and asking them in a way that yield the right answers from the technologies that we're using, and to create meaning out of those answers and then to connect it to other systems that we're using. Let me stop there. Drew, is that a little bit too pedantic? Is that sort of like right level? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a lot of ways, right, there's a positive view of the future there. You were saying on one end, why should us humans, you said that's almost like charitable to think like, oh, that's nice, you have a job, you should be lucky to have a job, right? And then on the other side of the spectrum is like, everyone is going to be free to achieve their destiny here, right? And as a true economist, you're like, it's probably somewhere in the middle, right? And we should figure that out. And it begs this broader question, not just of AI, but as machines continue to take on essentially the more transactional or objective components of work, what is that then freeing up the humans to do?
I think it's freeing us up to make meaning, right? There's no reason to expect that even a generally intelligent machine cares about things, right? We haven't programmed them yet to have emotions or to think that things are important on their own merits. But humans do think that things are important on their own merits, and we do, want to make meaning out of our lives, and we want to translate that meaning into something for other people. And I think that is what, even if we have fully intelligent machines, which we are very far away from general AI, maybe a technologist would say we're not that far away, but so far, ChatGPT is nothing like a real human, right? In all of its complexity. And as much as intelligent and as amazing as it is, it's not a thinking, feeling being, right? And we are, and I think that's really where, we will be sort of freed to make meaning, to have personal connections with other people in the course of our work, either our customers or our clients or our coworkers or our colleagues. And what I think is really tricky about that is that implies different skill needs, right, for all of us. Emotional resilience, emotional intelligence, critical thinking, embracing change. Those are actually really difficult skills for humans to master. And many will tell you that it takes a lifetime. I think one of the big challenges that we have coming up is how do we create skill systems, not just for technological skills, but also these other skills that are going to take up a lot more of our work. You don't need engagement in order to fill out paperwork all day, but you do need engagement to interact with really complex customer issues when customers are frustrated or at the end of a travel day. Like, you do need engagement to do that. And I think how we figure out how to automate all of the stuff that's boring or draining or not that exciting, and how do we help humans to sort of really lean into connection and meaning and, sort of investigative thinking. That's the sort of big question for us, in the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, and we'll hang on to that thought. We'll chat about it in a minute, which is, what is, how do we even begin to measure what that is, so we can understand how much critical thinking we need, or how good I, as a candidate or a worker, am at it, right? Mm-hmm. But staying on this talk track, right? You're absolutely right. I believe humans do want to translate meaning into work. And I think for a lot of us, you also mentioned the word dignity, right? Our work, because we spend so much time at it, we create a lot of meaning in it. Even if you look at the job itself and on the outside, you're like, how can there be a lot of meaning in this really transactional or tactical job? That said, this fear mongering that the media loves to, spin up so much, this fear is rooted in a general mistrust and a stigma, essentially, in this employee-employer relationship. And, I'm personally a believer that I think the employee-employer relationship has a lot to be desired. And I would even go as far to say that it is broken. How do you respond to that statement, and what do you attribute to your beliefs?
How do I respond to this statement? How do I respond to this statement that the employee-employer relationship is broken?
Yes.
I think I would challenge, when was it ever great? And that's not to say that there are good employer-employee relationships. Relationships are defined by our expectations of the people that are in that relationship, right? And what we think we deserve or can expect in that relationship and what we get, right? Our joy or our misery is in the difference between what we expect in that relationship and what we actually receive on both sides, employers and employees.
Mhm.
I think the history is sort of littered with complaints about the relationship, the employment relationship, right? I mean, go all the way back to the Marxist critique of capitalism and the nature of work, right? And it just sort of goes from there. And sorry, let me take a second to sort of organize my thoughts here, or else I'm really going to
Yeah,
go off on a, I'm
but this
really
is
going to go
really
off on
great.
a tangent.
Yeah.
I think the next thing I want to say is, like every relationship that humans have, no relationship is perfect. I think that the task for us isn't to think about how to make the perfect relationship. The task for us is how to create opportunities, as many as possible, for humans to find dignity, excitement in their work, or to leave their work and try something else, right? In the pursuit of a relationship where they can give what the employer is expecting and they can receive what they expect or want from an employer, right? I mean, as long as we have to work, then, and plenty of people want to work, right? Because they find meaning and purpose in it. As long as people have to work, then I think that the task isn't to define all employment relationships. It's to enable workers to know what they are looking for and to have great ways to find it in the market, and for employers to understand what workers want and need and to give them ways to provide it. Now, I want to go back to your bigger point, or your sort of top line question, because I feel like I dodged it a little bit, which is that the relationship is broken. And I think that really depends on who you are and what you expect out of that relationship. So plenty of people have said, you know, there's no safe, stable 30-year career anymore. And Willy Loman's Death of a Salesman, right, I think is sort of the, you know, when we had that, lots of people didn't want that, right? We have lots of culture around the disaffectation of stable, sort of not very exciting jobs that we feel like we can't leave because we have obligations. And so we can't say that that was sort of the golden age of employment, in the same way that we can't say that this is the golden age of employment because, you know, employers are less committed or workers are sort of less engaged. I think that there are, darn, Drew, you asked me a really complicated question, and I think I'm struggling to be succinct about it. Let me sort of try that again. Okay. So I want to respond to the top question, which is, you know, your assertion that the relationship is broken. And I think I would push back and say that depends on what you want out of the relationship, right? I've heard lots of lamentation that, you know, jobs aren't stable anymore, and that employers aren't committed to employees, and that employees aren't committed to employers. And that may be true to some extent for lots of people. I think that the counter example to that is this sort of, when we had stable 10 or 20 or 30-year careers, right? And employers were committed and employees were committed, but that wasn't necessarily fulfilling for everyone. And we have lots of cultural argument, right, through Death of a Salesman. Willy Loman is sort of the classic example here, but there's lots of others that wasn't great for everybody. And also I want to call out that career was available to a pretty particular set of college educated people, or people that were fortunate enough to be part of a very strong union. And that type of employment really didn't characterize the vast majority of employment in this country for many people. And I think that we just need to be mindful when we say that about what we're really trying to compare that to, and who it did work for, and also who it didn't work for. And now, right, the relationships that we have now work for some people and don't work for other people. And I don't even think that's a useful question. I think the question is, what characterizes the relationship today? Who does that work for? And for people that it doesn't work for, how do we create safeguards, opportunities, options for them so that they can move into a relationship that serves them better?
Love that you just said that. And it speaks to just there's evolution, right, in our role as humans in work. And one of the things I get fascinated by is the cyclical nature of the doing versus knowing economies, right? So industrial revolution, arguably a lot of doing, right? The knowers were able to optimize that process. Out comes the assembly line, right? Now we're able to have factories everywhere. More and more people get back to work. There's now a doing economy, right? So I think, and I would argue that now we're actually going from we're very much in a doing economy built on the platform of internet technology, and now AI, as it's encroaching on what we thought was all this knowledge work, like sales. A lot of sales work these days is not knowledge work. It is akin to blue collar work of before, following a process, making a call, following up with somebody, right? It quickly is becoming a doing, and AI is going to replace that. And so I wondered, just to get your perspective, are we on the cusp of another cycle and approaching a knowing economy now?
I think are we on the cusp of a new knowledge economy? Is that your question? Yeah,
Yes.
I think, right. Let me take a second. All right, I might have to talk through this a little bit because I've got
Totally
a sense of what I want to say. The automation of physical work, right, sort of defined the Industrial Revolution to maybe the middle of the last century through sort of like the 80s-ish, right? And then there's sort of, to your point, we've transformed. The US is a knowledge-based economy, right? We've automated a bunch of the physical doing. And now I think you're saying we're automating a bunch of the mental doing, right? That is what you might think of as sort of the low level of mental abilities. It doesn't really require much from a salesperson to press send on an email, right? And to do the follow-up calls. And I think when we used to think of, Ford's assembly line workers using one tool to do one thing on the car, there's an imperfect but useful analogy, right, to what, some of knowledge work is that didn't used to be, the basis of our economy, but now is the basis of our economy. And so the US is going to still be a knowledge economy. That's not in question. The question is, what sort of level of knowledge or thinking or skills, right, are we going to do? And we're definitely seeing the transition or the redefinition of white collar work as not being prestige in the way it was 50 years ago. But nevertheless, it's knowledge work. And I think AI has caught up to do that sort of base level of knowledge work, or to automate that, or to speed it up, which means that humans have to step up the knowledge ladder, right? And you see that in this proliferation of jobs like AI engineer, data scientist, business analyst, right? So take all that data and to create new things with it, but also to create meaning out of that and what it means. And I think what, for instance, in sales, we will see is that salespeople will figure out how to automate all that. And then they'll have to make decisions about how to sell differently, right? In more creative ways that create better conversion rates, right? Without sort of doing all of that work. So let me try and reformulate that in like a succinct line. The US used to be primarily a production economy. And when we were still doing that, we were automating the physical doing. The US is now a knowledge economy, and we're in the process of automating some of the knowledge doing. And I think we're in a transition where the US is still going to be a knowledge economy, but we're going to go farther than that. We are going to be an ideas and meaning economy, right? Which is sort of a higher level set of knowledge work than we've previously been. And we're seeing the automation of that sort of base level work, which is going to push us on that path.
That was it. Yeah.
I knew we would get there.
On a side note, I have a visual I'm going to show you, like I'm working on, which is like knowing and doing, and a line in between. And you see what you're talking about is there's this oscillation between humans and technology. And so it kind of starts with like industrial revolution as like splitting the cycle, but then the cycle starts to emerge this way. And so as to your point, like we're in knowing, but the knowing becomes automated.
Yeah.
I would argue that doing steps up, and that's actually, we're in a doing economy, but I'm not an economist. So this is really interesting.
I think I've not thought about, I think I was thinking about the doing like physical production. And I think I don't quite think I've fully digested how you're thinking about the doing, but I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, we will chat about that.
Okay.
That'll be a further thing. So isn't it just math, right? So a lot of this is mistrust with business. And so, you know, I'm a CEO of a company. I'm going to run my company as efficiently as possible. I'm a capitalist, right? People are expensive. So if I can replace them with automation, that saves me money, right? That's kind of underlying all of this, is like how are we thinking about workers? So if you were to say, hey, workers, if you want to get an edge, you next generation of workers especially, like what kind of skills and competencies do you think will be valued by business in the future?
What kinds of skills and what kinds of skills and competencies are businesses going to value in the future? So there's actually two parts of your question. And I think the first one is humans are costs to businesses, and humans are valuable to businesses, right? Which is going to feed into the second part of your question, which is what is the valuable part of humans in business now? And I think I'm going to revert back to a prior answer, which is the value of humans is in what we can do that machines can't do or can't do well, right? And what they can't do right now is ask the question, how much revenue did I generate from outbound sales last year versus inbound, right, SEO? Only a human can think of that question. A computer cannot currently think of that question. And then a computer can give you the answer, right? And then a computer cannot but the computer cannot say, it makes sense, right, for you to pursue SEO marketing versus outbound motions, because the answer to that depends on how expensive it is to do, how many people you have with that skill and experience, whether or not you are capable of doing more SEO optimization as a business. And I think that example brings us back to those skills, right? The skills are to ask the right question and to take that answer, but then meaningfully connect it to other systems, right, of knowledge and information in order to create insight that you can act on. And computers can't currently create insight, right? And I think we can take this sort of out of the office and onto the production floor, right? So, you know, every person who's managing a production line, right, with really modern technology is also in some respects a machinist and a data scientist, right? And if you are looking at the production spec on a line, you need to think about, you know, where those numbers are coming from, what's causing them, how to optimize the process, and to sort of get creative about thinking about new solutions, right? And computers can't think of new solutions. They can tell you what exists because that's the way we currently train them. And I think the ability to understand data and to investigate it, and then to ask great questions of the data. And I don't mean in like a way that we do it now. I actually think that there will be standards of practice for getting good prompts. And I think that you will be able to test for those skills. And I think that you could even put something like that into an interview, right? Hey, I have this type of system. Please create a set of prompts that get me a meaningful answer to a question that I care about. And I think that that is what we are going to start looking a lot more for as we sort of automate a lot of the technical tasks, even for data scientists. I think that we are going to figure out how to automate away a lot of the tasks of data scientists such that it will completely change what it means to be a person who works with data.
Absolutely. And this leads very well into this next question, which we've talked a little bit about fractional or freelance work. And, you know, is it appropriate to look at this? You know, I often would look at this and say, well, there are things that machines can do and we automate, and that's cool. And then there are other things that perhaps we don't view as strategically relevant to our business. So we're okay having a contractor do it. And one day that could be totally automated as well. Is that the appropriate way to think about the use? Because at your vantage point, like how companies are using fractional or freelance work?
I don't know that I think that's how, I don't think that I would disagree. Excuse me. Let me start that again. I don't know that I would wholly agree that contractors are just things that people haven't figured out how to automate yet. I think about it more of economists sort of break the world into two bits of knowledge. There's tacit knowledge, which is everything that can be written down, right? And just communicated over to another person. And then that's not right. Let me try that again. Okay. There's explicit knowledge, which is everything that can be written down and just given to another person. Something you can write in a book and have somebody else fully understand is implicit knowledge, which I just dated myself by thinking about books instead of the internet. Tacit knowledge is the art of knowledge and experience that can't be written down, but is still important to the quality of the output. And there is a lot of tacit knowledge in the world that is still currently only held by humans, and especially in that meaning making. Which, Drew, I just gave like an aside to your question. Let me backtrack and get to the point. I think the rise of digital platforms to allow companies to access talent on demand to do certain tasks that are almost always managed, right, and guided by somebody in the business. The person in the business understands the business use, understands what that product needs to look like, understands how it needs to be done and how it fits in with all those other business systems. They can direct, right, a contractor to fulfill that task on spec. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think the relationship is going. I think instead of having sort of full-time content writers on staff, right, which big businesses still currently do, but honestly, small businesses have never really done. It was always the CEO, as I'm sure you're well aware, like typing away, right, content for your blog to do better marketing. What I think has sort of opened up, especially for smaller businesses, is the ability to access talent that they would never have on staff, right? To do more stuff, because a single person in the business who understands the business need can now direct and manage, right? A bunch of people who can do things in an agile, on-time way with the skills, right, that are needed to do the job. I don't think about it as an automated question. I do think about it as a division of work that is enabled by technologies that honestly aren't even all that new, but that we've just become a lot more familiar with, like digital contracts, activity monitoring, the ability, you know, to find and search for contract labor through platforms like Upwork. I know you've got Adam Ozimek on here, so I'm sure he'll talk a lot about that. But I think it's really more that technology, not even that exciting technology, but technology has sort of enabled us to redistribute work in these ways, especially during a talent shortage, where talent's getting really pricey and businesses really need to think about sort of managing their costs and who they bring on and who they don't.
Do you think it's possible for a business to be run on 100% fractional or freelance work?
Can a business be run on fractional or freelance work? Yes. The answer is definitely yes. And I think that depends entirely on the kind of business you envision and the kind of work you intend to do. But even today, there's nothing that stops me, Liz Wilke, CEO of Liz Wilke Corp., you know, establishing an LLC and then just contracting out much or all of my work to other people, right, through a variety of contracting mechanisms. That is a business. It is even a company, right? And I think it's definitely possible. Do I think a 10,000 person business can be fully comprised of freelancers? It's hard to imagine, but not impossible, right? And I think we're just beginning to learn about, you know, when contractors and freelancers make sense and when they don't. And I will caveat this, that a lot of who is a contractor and who is a freelancer in this or any other country isn't just determined by what technology allows and what businesses desire, but also what society and governments decide is acceptable, right? About who can be a contractor and who needs to be an employee. And I think that conversation is also, being renegotiated as we speak. So even if it's technologically possible, whether or not we'll see that as a reality, I think depends on a lot of other factors.
Sure.
And the one example that everybody sort of throws out there is that, from a societal perspective, 100 years ago, or a little over 100 years ago, it was very acceptable to have children working on factory floors. And they were seen as a very cheap form of labor that could, manage the machines, et cetera. And we just decided as a society that that's not an okay thing. And it's not good for children to work, and it's not good for society to have children working in these conditions. That's not a technological thing. That's a societal thing, sort of deciding about what we will and won't do, regardless of what businesses want or what technology allows. And I think, we should just remember that that's part of the conversation too, and an important one, because it will determine our future.
Absolutely. And definitely make your point with that analogy, or that historical context.
Also, I don't want to say that I think that contract and freelance is like child labor. Those are very different, like, value arrangements.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And actually, I've been making the move to say, not even say contract work. To me, that's different than freelance or fractional work. Because the decision to do freelance or fractional workers, in my opinion, is like, I need part-time, I only need a quarter of this, right?
Yeah.
Versus, you just brought up a really interesting point. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. You made a comment that the contract is changing, right? When we think about that, tell me more about what that means and exactly what's changing.
Sorry, for clarification, the contract about who's an employee and who's a contractor?
Yeah.
So in the United States in particular, right, it sort of used to be that everybody was an employee if you worked for somebody, unless, right, you were sort of explicitly carved out as being a contractor. One of the reasons why it's such an important distinction here is because in the US, we tie a lot of social benefits to employment status, like whether or not you receive healthcare. Although we've had some significant changes, most people still get healthcare through their employer. Contributions to 401k and retirement, whether or not somebody pays taxes on your behalf, right? So that you don't have to do it yourself. And we also have certain unemployment protections and certain services that are available if you lose your employed job, but not your contracting job. I think that those policies made a lot of sense when the relationship between employees and companies was durable and longer lasting, and with a little more friction in it, right? So employers were less likely to let go of employees, and employees were less likely to leave employers. But I think that the employment relationship is changing to become less committed, even as it becomes more personal, ironically. And the regulations and policies that we have in place to govern who's who are becoming increasingly blurry, with lots more gray in there than there used to be. And so I think that as we negotiate sort of what a company needs a person for, and when they are, integral to the company or not integral to the company, is something that's currently up for grabs, right? As we reorganize who's in and who's out, right? And we're in business for themselves.
So I love what you just said about the employment relationship is changing to become less committed, even though it's becoming more personal. And to think of a contract as actually helping the individual probably more than the business, because it provides much more assurances than at will. Do you think that as we look ahead, we could potentially see much more in the form of solid contracts for employment than we will? Like, is this kind of the beginning of the end, or the beginning of the change of at will, especially in the US?
I don't think so. I mean, we have a long tradition of at will employment. And I also don't want to suggest that contracted employment is more stable, right? Even contracted employments have language in there that say, we can terminate 30 days notice for any cause, right? And, in fact, because employees tend to be protected not just by laws, but by HR policies that are internal to the firm, right? Like, so if you have an HR policy, even if the law, doesn't necessarily require you to do something, if your HR policy says that you'll do something, you're legally obligated to do it. If you have an employee and you're not legally obligated to do it, whatever it is, right? If you have a freelancer or a contracted worker. And so, I don't necessarily think that contracted workers are more secure from that individual perspective. What I do think that contractors see is that I don't have to put all my eggs in a single basket, right? And I can have contracted employment with 3 or 4 employers, right? And if I don't like what I'm being paid for one of them, I can turn around and double my rate, right, for somebody else, right? If I realize that I'm not being sort of paid fairly. And I think that lower level of commitment by one worker to any particular company is, I think, can be seen as a benefit to the worker, right? If that's the sort of thing that the sort of thing that you care about. Let me sort of think about how to finish this thought, because I'm definitely at risk of going off on a tangent. But I think I would just sort of reiterate the statement that I don't know that any specific employment relationship with a contracted worker is more secure than an employment relationship with an employee. I do think that contracted workers feel that they have more security as a whole because they have a portfolio of employers, right? So if I lose my contract with one, I have 2 or 3 others and I can pick up another one, right, really quickly. And I think an age where stuff is changing a lot faster than we're used to, right? That can be, I think that's sort of a new form of security that lots of workers are thinking about. And I think we'll see that evolve over time.
Amazing. One day over a beer, I'll tell you how I violently disagree with you.
Okay.
Only because you said because the contract says 30 days, but the implication is it can be changed. It can be negotiated. It can be preset. And therefore, you can have more control over your destiny at that employer. Whereas at will is just, you can fire me whenever you want.
I think we do maybe disagree on this a little bit. So we
Love
definitely
that.
should have a beer. I think I would say that that's true. And I think it depends entirely on the specialization and the niche aspect of your skills, right? But that's true even for employees, right? So if your employment arrangement is on paper the same, if you're like the CHRO versus, a recruiter at entry level, but that doesn't mean you have the same level of power in your employment relationship, even if both of them are employees, right? And I think that's true of freelancers and consultants and contracted workers as well.
Yeah, there's some societal, hierarchy relationships, right? That's kind of what you're saying. There's influence, right, and stature.
Well, there's influence, and then there's also just plain old skill. I mean, I don't know every CHRO in the world, but I think on average, we can expect that a CHRO has a lot more valuable skills that are much rarer, right? Like it's a lot easier to find, an entry-level recruiter than it is to find a new CHRO for your company. But actually, the example of CHROs is sort of interesting because I think we are seeing the rise of fractional executives, especially for smaller companies, right? Who are now have an opportunity to get the benefit of really specialized guidance and expertise and experience in a way that they can afford financially, right? Like there's an opportunity to do this sort of fractional work that you're saying, not just at an entry or a production level, but at like a really sophisticated, specialized level. And I think that's good for businesses in general, right? Because you just wouldn't have, a CHRO or a CFO. And what we're seeing is a lot of fractionalization, sort of even at that level.
Interesting. I can't wait to have a beer with you over that. So we're coming up on time. I have one more question.
Go for it.
If that's okay. You hit on this a little bit at the beginning, but ultimately, as an economist, how do you think of the value of a human in the work context? How would you help someone process that?
As an economist, I would tell you that the value of a human in the work context is related to what they can produce with the technology that they have, which is why as technology becomes more sophisticated, we have to become more sophisticated in order to become, right, sort of really valuable. It is also related to the value we bring out of others in the workplace, right? So if I am productive, that's one thing. And if I make 10 other people more productive by giving them a sense of meaning, by creating connection, by facilitating work for them, that's an even bigger value add. As a human being, I don't even think that's the most interesting question, right? I think the more interesting question is its inversion, which is what is the value of work to humans? And back to my earlier statement, how do we make work work? Work is a necessity for most people. But that doesn't mean that we should serve the work. It means the work should serve us if we have to do it, right? If it is all possible to make that true. And I think that we should think about, from a business perspective, what's the value of humans at work? And we've talked about those skills and how that complements, right, technology. And I think that it's completely inextricable from the question about how do we create good places to work for people? Because if you want somebody to ask great questions, to think up new questions, to motivate others, to bring their sort of emotional selves right to work, to do all those things that humans currently do far, far better than ChatGPT, you need to figure out how to make work engaging and purposeful and motivating and dignified, right? For people that you are asking to bring that human part of themselves. Those two questions for me aren't separable from each other.
You almost made me cry when you said, how do we make work work? Work is a necessity to most people, but that doesn't mean we should serve the work. It should serve us. And I think that is just, thank you.
Thank you. That was a good question. Thank you for saving it for the end.
I can't wait to chat more because, yeah, there's so much, Liz, that like aligns with shit that I'm looking at. And I think we definitely need to be friends. Is there something else you'd like me to ask or something else you want to talk about before we wrap today? Any statements you want to make?
I don't know if you've already asked other people about the like fair and portable performance management. And I don't even know that I have a great answer to that question, but I love the question. And I think it's a really important.
Fair and portable. Tell me more.
This is something that Connor sent in the bulleted list.
Oh.
And I think it's something that you and I had talked about, which is how do you document
okay, yes.
on the job?
So I have this as a question, and just because of time, I didn't bring it up, but let's do it.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm actually going to set up the challenge. I'm not going to set up the solution.
Okay.
But I think the question of fair and portable benefits is such an important question going forward. We know from psychology and management literature that the vast majority of adult learning that happens on the job. And we also know that the rate at which technology is changing means that skilling and reskilling and upskilling and lifelong learning is the way, right, to sort of continue to increase the level of sophistication of the work that we do in order to stay abreast of all these technological changes that are coming down the pipe. And some people are very good at documenting and displaying and communicating that skilling. Just because you're not good at it doesn't mean you don't have the skills, or just because you're not good at communicating doesn't mean you don't have the skills. And the major challenge, I think, for us going forward is how do we democratize that and make it automatic, such that if you have learned a skill on the job, that is documented, but also that data belongs to you. Previously, a lot of that data, like internal assessments, performance reviews, portfolios of work, have belonged to the company. And I think the single most important question that we ought to be asking ourselves is, can we redefine some of that data ownership such that the worker themselves can share it with other people? Because it's not just, because it doesn't just belong to the company, it also belongs to the worker, right? That proof and that documentation. And I think that's the easiest way for us to think about progress on this road. And I'd love to see that happen more.
Yeah. One of the things we talk about on this show, right, is there are a few components to what you just said. There's validity, validated performance, validated skill, experience attainment, which it doesn't really exist today. Mm-hmm. It's embellished on LinkedIn and resumes and everything else, and maybe confirmed via reference call, right? And then there's the whole notion of portability and ownership, and then there's ownership. Yeah. Are there any technologies that you see as potentially or things you get excited about that will actually allow us to have that portability?
I'm gonna reference back to my LinkedIn days. Also, I should mention that I do not speak on behalf of Gusto in this respect. This is just me like thinking about things that I think are cool. And nor am I a lawyer who does like data.
This is fine. You can be like, this is not me speaking on Gusto's behalf. This is, yep.
Yeah. I think that there are just some, like, I think data interoperability, I think beyond technology, just straight up standards, right? So performance reviews are conducted in wildly different ways across companies. Doesn't have to be that way per se, right? We have industrial standards for many, many things, right? And professional standards for many, many things. We've just never done it for performance, right? Because there's never been a reason to, but there might be a reason to now. So I don't know that there probably are technological solutions. I think Web3 and sort of like blockchain are important for things like validation and a sort of, proof, right? Not being a cryptocurrency blockchain person expert, I'm going to stay away from that part. I think that even before we get there, the standardization, right? Because how can you even build a blockchain validation system off of, a piece of data that shows up in, an infinite number of different ways? I think that the standardization of certain parts of performance or certain parts of skills within industries is sort of the first step, because then you can build off of that standard, right? Everybody can be trained on it. They can understand what it means to be at some level or another. I think that's the work of many, many professions, many, many industries, many, many HR professionals to sort of come together and think about what that is. It's a big task, but it's not an impossible one. It's just one that needs knowledge, energy, and resources.
Yes. And what a fantastic way to end, because I totally agree with you. And that's a huge opportunity. There's a problem space there. And it probably isn't just the economists or the HR people, but like ONET, I don't think ONET does jack with performance standard. And it's a huge opportunity for us.
There have been a lot of like proofs of concept. And I know we're sort of,
we are
just sort of chatting now. There are lots of proofs of concepts. But I don't think we've noodled the idea, but we haven't invested in scale. And we haven't, I think, like as a society, I don't know who I mean we, when I talk about we, but like to date, there hasn't been sort of a unified push, right, to sort of establish this and to sort of coordinate. And I actually think this is a job for government, to be honest, to be a convener here, because you just have to coordinate across so many industries, and across so many like practices and verticals. Like there's no good reason, that the, like silicon chip manufacturers are going to coordinate with like, accountant professional associations in order to think about assessment. Maybe they don't need to, but you definitely need someone sort of keeping an eye on the holistic view. I would not commit myself to that, because now I'm absolutely thinking out loud, brainstorming. So
that's totally fine. But it leads itself to like government think. There's a lot that has to be done there, which also shows that there's a lot of time that is going to pass before that even becomes a thing, which also shows that when we see good human ability in people and we don't even know how to measure it, but we're good, humans are good, there is going to be some weird wonkiness in compensation and how we pay those people. And that's, to me, that's when like the fulcrum starts to like truly break, and we'll start to shift, because those individuals, there'll be way more individuals making more money because there's no measurement standard, but we know it's good, than you would typically see in a 1 or 2% sort of upper echelon economy. We're going to chat about that on our next show, Liz. Thank you so much.
This was so fun. Drew, thanks so much for the invitation.